vanishing folklore and belief. Celtic Religion of Antiquity, public domain reading. Celtic religion and the development of individualized deities. Like other religions, those of the Celtic lands of Europe supplemented the earlier animism by a belief in spirits who belonged to trees, animals, rocks, mountains, springs, rivers, and other natural phenomena. And in folklore, there still survives abundant evidence that the Celt regarded spirits as taking upon themselves a variety of forms, both animal and human. It was this belief of the spirits in animal form that helped to preserve the memory of the older totemism of historic times. It is thus that we have names of the type of Branogenos, son of the raven, Artogenos, son of the bear, and the like, not to speak of simpler times like Bran, raven, March, horse, surviving into historic times. Bronze images too have been found at Nuvay-et-Suret of a horse and a stag, now in the Orléans Museum, provided with rings, and which were, as M. Salomon Reinach suggests, probably used for the purpose of carrying these images in procession. The wild boar, too, was a favorite emblem of Gaul, and there is extant a bronze figure of a Celtic Diana riding on a boar's back. At Bolar, near Nuits, there was discovered a bronze mule. In the Museum of Mayence is a bas-relief of the goddess of the horses, Epona, riding on horseback. One of the most important monuments of this kind is a figure of Artio, the bear goddess, from Celtic Artos, a bear, found at Muri, near Bern. In front of her stood a figure of a bear, which was also found with her. The bull of Tarvos Trigaranos, bas-relief of Notre Dame, was also in all likelihood originally a totem, and similarly the horned serpents of other bas-reliefs, as well as the boar found on Gaulish ensigns and coins, especially in the Belgic territory. There is a representation too of a raven on a bas-relief at Compignon, the name Mokos, which is identified with Mercury on inscriptions and which is found inscribed at Langres, Trobasso, the valley of the Ossola, and the Borgos San Dalmazzo, is undoubtedly the philological equivalent of the Welsh moch, swine. In Britain, too, the boar is frequently found on the coins of the Iceni and other tribes. In Italy, according to Mr. Ward Fowler, the pig was an appropriate offering to deities of the earth, so that, in the widespread use of the pig as a symbol in the Celtic world, there may be some ancient echo of a connection between it and the earth spirit. Its diet of acorns, too, may have marked it out in the early days of life in the forest clearings, as the animal embodiment of the oak spirit. In the legends of the Celtic races, even in historic times, the pig, and especially the wild boar, finds an honorable place. In addition to the animals aforementioned, the ass, too, was probably at one time venerated in one of the districts of Gaul. It is not improbable that Mulo, the name of a god identified with Mars and regarded as the patron of muleteers, mentioned on inscriptions at Nantes, Créon, and Les Provenceres, near Créon, meant originally an ass. The goddess Epona, also, whose worship was widely spread, was probably at one time an animal goddess in the form of a mare, and the name of another goddess, Demona, either from the root dam, ox, or Welsh, dafad, sheep, may similarly be that of an ancient totem, sheep or cow. Nor was it in the animal world alone that the Celts saw indications of the divine. while the chase and the pastoral life concentrated the mind's attention on the life of animals, the growth of agriculture fixed man's thoughts on the life of the earth and all that grew upon it, while at the same time he was led to think more and more of the mysterious world beneath the earth, from which all things came and to which all things returned. Nor could he forget the trees of the forest, especially those which, like the oak, had provided him with their fruit of food in time of need. The name Druid, as well as that of the center of worship of the Gauls of Asia Minor, Drunemeton, the oak grove, the statement of Maximus of Tyre that the representation of Zeus to the Celts was a high oak. Pliny's account of Druidism, the numerous inscriptions to Silvanus and Silvana, the mention of Dervones or Dervone on an inscription of Cavalzesio near Brescia, and the abundant evidence of survivals in folklore as collected by Dr. Fraser and others, all point to the fact that tree worship, and especially that of the oak, had contributed its full share to the development of Celtic religion. At any rate, in some districts and in some epochs, the development of martial and commercial civilization in later times tended to restrict it, typically and more primitive developments, to the more conservative parts of the Celtic world. The fact that in Caesar's time its main center in Gaul was in the territory of the district of the god Essus, the eponymous god of the Esuvi tribe, and in some degree of the Tutates, the cruelty of whose rites is mentioned by Lucan, it had occurred to the present writer before writing the same view expressed by M. Reinach, that the worship of Essus in Gaul was almost entirely local in character. With regard to the rites of the Druids, Caesar tells us that it was customary to make huge images of wickerwork, into which human beings, usually criminals, were placed and burnt. The use of wickerwork and the suggestion that the rite was for purifying the land indicates a combination of the ideas of tree worship with those of early agricultural life. When the Emperor Claudius is said by Suetonius to have suppressed Druidism, what is meant is, in all probability, that the more inhumane rites were suppressed, leading, as the scholiasts on Lucan seem to suggest, to a substitution of animal victims instead of human victims. On the side of civil administration and education, the function of the Druids as the successors of the primitive medicine men and magicians doubtless varied greatly in different parts of Gaul and Britain, according to the progress that had been made in the differentiation of functions in social life. The more we investigate the stage of the Celtic world in ancient times, the clearer it becomes that in civilization it was very far from being homogeneous, and this heterogeneity of civilization must have had its influence on religion as well as on other social phenomena. The natural conservatism of agricultural life, too, perpetuated many practices even into comparatively late times, and of these we catch a glimpse in Gregory of Tours when he tells us that at the Auton the goddess Berecintia was worshipped, her image being carried on a wagon for the protection of the fields and the vines. It is not impossible that by Berecintia Gregory meant the goddess Brigindu, whose name occurs on an inscription at Volnay, in the same district of Gaul. The belief in corn spirits and other ideas connected with the central thought of the farmer's life show, by their persistence in Celtic as well as other folklore, how deeply they had entered into the inner tissue of the agricultural mind, so as to be linked to the keenest emotions. Here the rites of religion, whether persuasive as in prayer or compulsory as in sympathetic magic, whether associated with communal or propitiatory sacrifice, whether directed to the earth or to heaven, all had an intensely practical and terribly real character. Due to man's constant preoccupation with the growth and storage of food for both man and beast. In the hunting, the pastoral, and above all in the agricultural life, religion was not a matter merely of imagination or sentiment, but one most intimately associated with the daily practice of life. And this practical interest included in its purview rivers, springs, forests, mountains, and all the setting of man's existence. And what is true of agriculture is true also in a greater or lesser degree of the life of the Celtic metal worker or the Celtic sailor. Even in late Welsh legend, Amethion, the old Celtic Ambactonos, the patron god of farming, Welsh Amaeth, and Gofanon, the patron god of the metal worker, Welsh Gof, Irish Gobha, were not quite forgotten, and the prominence of the worship of the counterparts of Mercury and Minerva in Gaul in historic times was due to some sense of respect and gratitude which each trade and each locality felt for the deity who had rid the land of monsters and who had brought man into the comparative calm of civilized life. If you enjoyed this reading, take a moment and subscribe to this channel. There will be more like it. Please excuse some of my foreign pronunciation. I'll do the best I can. Thank you very much for listening. Vanishing folklore and belief.